how's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Yehud in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Nancy in North Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Paula in the Great Northwest. Sharon, bring them home now. Amen. Bring them home now, and we'll dedicate our learning again today. Bring home the hostages. Please, God, bring them home safely and end this war with a secure and lasting peace for all in the Holy Land. Where was I? Paul in the Great Northwest. Jonathan in Ventura, Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida, Karen in Northern California, Shandora in the Bronx, Bella in Florida, Mark in New Orleans, Melissa in Great Neck, Florence in New York City, Carolyn in Raleigh, Guy in Ohio, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Chaim in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia, Ella in the house. Welcome, everybody. Gonna have some very interesting dilemmas and how they were dealt with in the ancient world. And these are the kinds of dilemmas that are definitely not solely the province of the ancient world. So today, very interesting daf. Let's get into it. Our daf is page 116 here in Tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. We're almost at the end. We're on page 116 today here on the 26th of February. Tractate ends on page 119, which will be on February 29th. 7, 8, 9, right? That's Thursday. So Siyum on Thursday. And Friday, March 1st, we open Tractate Bava Metzia. Great time to jump into Daf Yomi if you know somebody who's been thinking about giving it a try. We pick this up toward the bottom of page 115b, a few paragraphs from the bottom. And we're continuing our discussion of Mishna number 5 here in chapter 10 of Tractate Bava Kamma. And so we were talking in this Mishnah about two people who ran into each other, both carrying a jug, and the jugs broke. One had a jug of honey, one had a jug of wine. So if we're going to be able to rescue, in fact, he had a barrel of wine and a jug of honey. The jug of honey broke. So it's now going to start to leak all over the place. The honey is worth significantly more than the wine. So if the one with the wine will pour out his wine and catch the honey, which is worth more, that would seem to be an efficient use of the barrel, right, to save that which is more valuable. But he can't assume that the one carrying the honey would agree to this arrangement where the one who spills out his wine in order to save the honey wants to be reimbursed for the wine that he poured out in order to save the more expensive honey. If he says to him, I'll pour out my wine and rescue your honey, but you got to reimburse me, and the guy says, okay, obviously he's entitled to the reimbursement. But if he just assumes that they have that arrangement because it would make more sense to save the more valuable product, the Mishnah says that the one who pours out his wine is only going to get compensated for his time and effort that he put into saving the honey, but not for throwing away his wine out of the barrel in order to save the honey. So, pertaining to this discussion, we continue. It has now been established at the end of yesterday's discussion that the Baraisa, which we brought in to help this discussion, stated that if one's barrel of untithed, impure wine, right, so wine that is untithed, that means it has to have tithes taken out of it, terumah, the first 2% for the priest, for a Kohen, the next 10% for the Levite, and the next 10%, second tithe, that's Meiser Sheni, either for the person himself to use to fund the trip to Jerusalem when the temple is standing, to go there for festivals, or in certain years of the Shemitah cycle, it's given to the poor. Okay? That's the tithing. Impure means ritually impure. So if the wine or other produce came into contact with a source of impurity, like a dead body, like a dead creeping thing, like somebody suffering from tsaras, and then the item became impure, tameh, no longer ritually pure, tahor. Right? So if the item became tameh, this is no good for giving to a priest, because a priest could only consume terumah. The terumah is for the priest, but it can only be consumed if both the terumah and the priest are in a state of tahara, ritually pure. So terumah that has been rendered impure, usually worthless, but not necessarily, as we shall see. Okay, so it has now been established that the Baraisa, which states that if one's barrel of untithed, impure wine is breaking, he may separate it as terumah of the tithe for other barrels of untithed, impure wine, and this may be explained in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah. Now that doesn't sound so bad, right? Normally you would think, well, something that is impure, how could it be separated as terumah? Well, if all of his produce became impure, he's not going to go find pure produce just to call it the terumah of all the impure produce. Right, so once all of the produce is impure, he still has to separate terumah from it, and he'll give impure terumah, certainly not desirable, but sometimes the only way to proceed forward. And, the priest won't be able to consume it himself, but he could sell it, because only priests need to be in a state of tahara and to have the terumah be tahor in order for them to consume it. But other people don't have to consume things that are in a state of ritual purity, right? The average Jew can become impure and consume ritually impure food. Please remember, if you're new here, impurity, when we're talking about ritual impurity, this has nothing to do with hygiene, with germs. That's something that might cause sickness. Has nothing to do with that. This is just ritual impurity and keeping things in a state of ritual purity. And so the sort of clearest case of that is that if a person came into contact, let's say, with a corpse, or with a person who was suffering from the skin disease tsaras, or with a menstruating woman, so he would become impure, and there were different degrees of impurity that would require different kinds of purification. But until he went through a purification ritual, he wouldn't be able to enter the Temple Mount when the temple was standing. You couldn't enter there if you were tameh. And corpse impurity, which is the greatest source of impurity, you would need the waters of sprinkling and a 7-day purification period before you could enter the temple. Priests included, right? So priests who were serving in the temple but who came into contact with a corpse, like attending a funeral and helping to bury the body, would have to go through that 7-day purification before they could return to the temple and serve there. Okay, getting back to what we're talking about here. So if you have impure produce, seems like you can separate impure terumah from it. So let's go on. So the Gemara asks, and I'm sorry, in that brisa from yesterday, which said you can separate impure wine, impure terumah from impure wine, was in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah. So the Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Nehemiah, may we separate terumah from impure produce for other impure produce? But isn't it taught in another brisa that one may separate terumah from produce that is impure for other produce that is impure, and from produce that is pure for other produce that is pure, and from produce that is pure for produce that is impure? But, as we would expect, you cannot separate from produce that is impure for produce that is pure, right? If there is pure produce available, you have to separate from that in order to give to the priest so that it should be pure. You can't separate from impure produce in order to tithe, the terumah tithe, right, the first 2%, to give to a priest. You can't separate from impure produce in order to render tithed produce which is pure. And Rabbi Nehemiah says, even with regard to separating from produce that is impure for produce that is impure, the sages permitted one to separate terumah in this manner, but only in the case of demai. What is demai? Demai is doubtfully tithed produce, right? So there's going to be leniencies for this because it's based on doubt, based on a suffix, doubt. What is the doubt? So when people in ancient times were purchasing produce from a sort of common Jew who you suspect has very little education, and you're not sure that he separated the Levite's tithe from his produce. And what was happening is that kind of ordinary, uneducated people, they knew that they had to separate terumah, that first 2% for a priest. But not everyone knew properly how to do it to separate the next 10% for the Levite. And so when you purchased from such a person, you weren't sure if he had already tithed it or not. Now, obviously, you could ask, so there might still be a suspicion that he would lie. Or if we have a situation where he forgot to ask. So now he brings this produce home. Normally, it would have been tithed by the seller, but he's not sure if it was tithed. So the sages said in that situation where doubtfully tithed produce, because you bought it from an ignoramus, right, an am haaretz, known as an am haaretz, people of the land, ignoramus, right, then you have to tithe it again. So it might end up being tithed twice. But this is a stringency to make sure that it was tithed and that you're not eating untithed produce, which would be a transgression. Now, this is based on doubt. Probably it was tithed, but you're not sure. And that's why they're making this extra stringency of tithing it, the buyer tithing it, just to make sure that it is tithed, right? So what Rabbi Nehemiah is saying is this idea of tithing from impure produce, even on behalf of impure produce, we're only going to allow that in the case of demai because there's already a doubt there. But if you know you're tithing from impure for impure, it sounds like Rabbi Nehemiah would not allow this. Now the Gemara discusses the continuation of the Baraisa that it cited previously. The master said in the Baraisa, but with regard to oil, he should not do so due to the priest's loss. And the Gemara asks, what is different about a leaking barrel of impure oil, which one may not separate as terumah, because if he does so, the priest will suffer a loss. Well, that case is different because the impure terumah oil is fit to be used to kindle a fire, and the priest will now not receive that oil. So impure oil, you can give it to a priest because he doesn't have to eat it. He can use it to light his lamp. And the Gemara challenges, but wine is also fit to be used if it becomes impure, because even if the priest can't drink it, he can use it to sprinkle on the floor in order to impart a pleasant aroma. So why is there no concern that the priest will suffer a loss? And if you would say that sprinkling is nothing, i.e. it is insignificant, doesn't Shmuel say in the name of Rabbi Chia that one drinks from a log of wine worth 1 selah, and one sprinkles from a log of wine worth 2 selah, which indicates that there is greater benefit from sprinkling wine than drinking it. You use better wine for sprinkling. And the Gemara answers, here we are dealing with new wine that has not yet developed an aroma and is therefore not fit for sprinkling. And the Gemara counters, but isn't it fit to allow it to age so that it will become fit for sprinkling? And the Gemara responds, if one waits for it to age, he might come to experience a mishap with it, as he will forget that it is impure terumah, which is forbidden for consumption. So the Gemara asks, oil should also be subject to the concern that one might come to experience a mishap with it, as he might forget that it is forbidden for consumption and mistakenly consume it. And the Gemara explains the law is that the priest must place the oil in a foul vessel, and there is no concern that he will consume it, as such oil is used only for kindling the lamp. And the Gemara asks, so let the wine also be placed in a foul vessel, in which case there would be no concern that he would drink it. The Gemara responds, now that he desires to use it for sprinkling, would he place it in a foul vessel? This would ruin its aroma. Consequently, the wine may not be kept due to concern over a possible mishap, while the oil may be kept. And the Gemara notes, and the concern with regard to a mishap itself is a dispute between the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishnah, as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to a barrel of terumah wine that became impure and is therefore forbidden for consumption. Beis Shammai say the wine must all be poured out in order to prevent a possible mishap. And Beis Hillel say, let the wine be used for sprinkling. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosei, said, I will decide the law by proposing an intermediate opinion. If the wine became impure in a house, it may be used for sprinkling, as it can be used immediately. But if it became impure in the field, it must all be poured out, as it is possible that by the time it is brought into the house and used for sprinkling, someone may get confused and drink it. Now we're on page 116a. And there are those who say that he decided the law as follows: with regard to aged wine, it may be used for sprinkling, as it is fit to be sprinkled immediately. But with regard to new wine, which does not yet have a pleasant aroma, it must all be poured out in order to prevent a possible mishap. And they said to Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosei, a decision by a third party does not conclusively decide the law. Very interesting note. When there is a dispute between two sages, in this case between the schools of Hillel and Shammai, and a third sage issues a ruling in accordance with one of them, the law is generally in accordance with the decision of the third sage. See Shabbat 39b, which is the opinion of, therefore, is now the opinion of the majority. So in this case, however, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel did not distinguish between the field and the house. The opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosei, is merely a third opinion rather than a ruling in accordance with one of the original disputants. Others explain that since Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosei, lived in a latter generation than Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, his opinion is not given enough weight to determine which opinion is considered the majority, right? And we have a general principle that sages from earlier times have greater authority than sages from later times. Why? Because they're closer in time to the original giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Now, the Mishnah teaches, back to our Mishnah, where a guy carrying a barrel of wine and another one with a jug of oil bump into each other and the jug of oil breaks and the oil is spilling out. And we are considering the possibility of using the wine barrel to save the oil, or rather, the honey, to save the honey. So the Mishnah teaches that if the owner of the wine said to the owner of the honey, I will salvage your honey and you will pay me the value of my wine. So, and he agrees to it. So in that situation, the owner of the honey is obligated to give him compensation for the wine. And the Gemara asks, why is this stipulation binding? Let the owner of the honey say to him, I was merely fooling with you when I accepted your condition, and I did not agree to it at all. Now, this is kind of a sleazy answer that the guy whose honey was saved would say, right? The one with the wine, maybe he was being opportunistic. Maybe the one with the honey is concerned that the one with the wine bumped into him on purpose. Well, let's give him the benefit of the doubt, right? So maybe, as he thought about it later, is that the one with the wine, he was carrying very cheap wine, bumped into him. Now the honey jug is broken. The guy with the wine says, hey, listen, I'll save your honey, but it's going to cost you the value of my wine that I need to spill out in order to use my barrel to save your honey. The guy says, yes, anything, right? So in the heat of the moment, right, when he's afraid of a big loss, he agrees to it. Later, the guy who poured out his wine presents a bill much larger than the one who agreed to it in the heat of the moment was expecting. And so then maybe he's going to say, well, listen, at that moment I said anything, but I wasn't agreeing to such an exorbitant price. For your time, I'll compensate you. For, the value of cheap wine, which is what I thought it was, I'll compensate you. But not this bill that you're presenting me now. Right? And there were no witnesses. So he could say, I didn't really mean it. Could he say that? That's the question. The Mishnah seems to say no. If he agreed to it in the heat of the moment, the deal is binding. Right? So the Gemara asks, why is the stipulation binding? Let the owner of the honey say to him, I was merely fooling with you when I accepted your condition, and I did not agree to it at all. Now, isn't it taught in a Baraisa? In a case where one was fleeing from prison and there was a ferry before him, and he said to the ferryman, take this whole dinar and take me across the river. And this is much more than the price of a ferry ride, this whole dinar. Take this whole dinar and take me across the river. And the ferryman, so in that situation, the ferryman has the right to collect only his usual wage, but not the whole dinar. So apparently the prisoner could have said to him, I was merely fooling with you and never intended to pay you a full dinar. So here also let the owner of the honey say to the owner of the wine, I was merely fooling with you. So if we just pause for a second, what's different? Well, the ferryman was just doing his job. A person came and said, take me across the river, right? Normally, the ferryman gets paid for doing exactly that. So it seems like the only thing that was different is that the guy had a whole dinar to pay with and the ferryman didn't have change available, right? And so he says, well, take me across. But really, you would think, why should you charge me more just because I'm in a hurry? You're going across anyway, and this is the normal fare. Whereas the one who poured out his wine, that's quite an abnormal day he's having. His wine barrel got damaged. He poured out what's left of it, and now he's saving the guy's honey. That is definitely not the normal course of business. So are we going to extend the principle of the ferryman who is not allowed to overcharge just because his passenger, has a pressing need to get across the river? In this case, he's escaping from prison. Now, that doesn't mean he's a dangerous criminal who has escaped from prison. I think we're talking more like somebody who, was taken hostage and managed to escape from his captors. It's more like that. Right? So the Gemara answers, well, this case in the Mishnah is not comparable to the case cited above. Rather, it is comparable to the latter clause of that same Baraisa, which states, and if he said to the ferryman, take this dinar as your wage and take me across the river, then the prisoner must give him his wage in the full amount, i.e. the entire dinar, right? So in other words, if he agreed to pay more than the standard rate, and he agreed because he was in a big hurry to get away from his captors, so then he has to pay. So one case is he gave more than it was worth. He just didn't want to talk about the price. He said, let's go. So the ferryman got the whole dinar, but when they get to the other side, he's like, well, give me my change. The guy said, hey, you gave me a dinar. Why should I give you change? I saw you were in a hurry, so I took the dinar. But they didn't talk about it. That's obviously different than if they negotiated. He says, oh, I see you're in a hurry. Well, it's going to cost you a whole dinar. Yes, anything, take the dinar. So he got the benefit of the bargain, right? Of what he bargained for. He agreed to pay the whole dinar. So what is different in the first clause, which states that the ferryman receives only his regular wage, and what is different in the latter clause, which states that he receives the full dinar? And Rabbi Baruch Hama said the latter clause deals with a different kind of example. It deals with a trapper who scoops fish from the sea, meaning a fisherman. And he can say to the prisoner, so the ferryman is not a regular ferryman, he's just somebody who has a boat. And he can say to the prisoner, well, you caused me a loss of fish worth a dinar, which I would have caught had I not taken you across the river. And similarly, in the case of the Mishnah, the owner of the wine suffers a financial loss in order to save the honey. And therefore, he is entitled to the compensation that the owner of the honey agreed to pay. Right? So one is a ferryman who's taking people across anyway. Another is a guy who happens to be there with a boat. He wanted to be fishing. He agreed to take a dinar because he's going to give up his time that he could have spent catching fish. And that's similar to the one who spills out the wine in order to save the honey. Now, the Mishnah teaches if a river washed away. Now we're back to our Mishnah, number 5 here in Tractate Bava Kamma, which went on to say that if a river washed away his donkey and the donkey of the other man, and his donkey is worth 100 dinars, etc. In other words, two guys are going to lose their donkeys because the river is suddenly flooding. One of them is able to save one of the donkeys. Let's say one is an old man who can't really do anything. The other one is a young man. The old man has a very valuable donkey worth 200 dinars. The young man has a less valuable donkey worth, let's say, 100 dinars. The old man can't save anything. The young man is going to be able to save one of the donkeys. it would seem better for society that he saves the 200 dinar donkey than the 100 dinar donkey. Set aside emotional relationships, with animals that you've owned for a long time. So it would be better to save the more valuable property. If he just assumes he's going to be compensated for allowing his own donkey, the cheaper one, to drown in order to save the rich man's donkey without checking with him first, it's going to be that same situation as the wine and the honey. He's got to get the okay from the old man. Listen, I'm going to let my donkey drown in order to save yours, but you got to compensate me for the loss of my donkey. And the old man says, yes, of course. Then the old man's going to have to pay. So the Mishnah teaches, if a river washed away his donkey and the donkey of the other man, and his donkey is worth 100 dinars, etc. So the Gemara notes, and it is necessary to teach both the case of the barrels of wine and honey and the case of the donkeys. Seems like exactly the same principle. So why did the Mishnah teach both kinds of incidents? It must be that each one teaches a different law. And both are necessary. As if the Mishnah had taught us only the first case, that of the wine and the honey, it might be said that it is only there in that case that when the owner of the wine states his stipulation, the owner of the honey gives him the value of the entire loss. And why is this? It is because the wine is lost through the direct action of its owner. He's going to pour out the wine from his barrel in order to use the barrel to save the honey. The direct action to pour out the wine. But here, in the case of the donkeys, since the donkey is lost by itself by the flooding river, then we could say the one who salvages the donkey of his fellow has the right only to his wage, i.e. compensation for his labor, because his donkey would have been lost anyway. Now you could say, whoa. He could have rescued one of the donkeys. He chose to rescue the more expensive donkey. And the answer would be, well, how is he so sure that he could have saved his donkey? Maybe his donkey was a little bit further away and he couldn't have caught it. And he only could catch the rich man's donkey. So if his donkey was a total loss anyway, he should only be compensated for his time and effort saving the rich man's donkey. He didn't really sacrifice his own donkey. It was going to be lost anyway. That's what he says, but do we know that for sure? Right? So that's why the Mishnah teaches that he has to get the old man to agree. Yes, I'll compensate you for giving up your donkey if you rescue mine. And if the Mishnah had taught us only the case of the latter clause, meaning the donkeys, it might be said that it is here in the case of the donkeys, that if the intention of the one who saved the donkey was unspecified, i.e. he did not stipulate that the owner of the other donkey would compensate it for the loss of his own donkey, only there he has the right to he has the right to receive only his wage, right, meaning for time and effort, not reimbursement for the donkey, because the donkey would have been lost by itself. But there, where the barrel of wine is lost through the direct action of the owner, one might say, even in a case where the intention of the owner of the wine was unspecified, the owner of the honey must give him the value of the entire barrel of wine. The Gemara concludes, indeed, both cases are necessary, right? So the real difference between them is that the guy is going to, intentionally pour out his wine in order to save the honey, whereas with the donkey was going to be lost anyway. Even if he did nothing, the donkey was going to be lost. Whereas if he did nothing, the wine was going to be saved. Now, the Gemara cites a relevant discussion to what we're talking about here. Rav Kahana raised a dilemma before Rav. If one descended into the river to rescue another person's donkey instead of his own, after stipulating that he would be compensated for the loss of his own donkey, and then his own donkey emerged from the river by itself, he was ready to sacrifice his donkey, and the old man agreed, yes, I will compensate you for your donkey if you will save my donkey. Right? But then, so he saves the rich man's donkey worth 200 dinars, and now he wants to be paid the 100 dinars when he sacrificed his own donkey. But then it turns out that his own donkey didn't drown. It emerges from the river later, and they find it along the river. Now at that point, is he still entitled to collect the 100 dinars from the older, wealthier man? That's the question. Is the rescuer still entitled to payment from the owner of the donkey that he saved, despite the fact that he did not suffer a monetary loss? And Rav said to him, Yes, the rescuer is still compensated because it was from heaven that mercy was bestowed upon him, and his good fortune does not affect their agreement. And this is like that case where Rav Safra was traveling in a caravan, and a certain lion followed the caravan, accompanying them along the way. And every night, right, the people in the caravan were afraid that one of the humans would be attacked by the lion that was roaring in the night. Right? Very scary. You're sleeping outside in the desert under the stars, and there's a lion roaring nearby who's hungry. You can't afford that the lion will eat one of the camels, because then, provisions will have to be left behind. You obviously don't want one of the humans to be eaten. So what do? You sacrifice the donkeys that are in the caravan. So every night, the travelers would send out one of their donkeys to the lion, and the lion would eat it. Now, when Rav Safra's time arrived to provide the lion with prey, he sent his donkey, but the lion did not eat it. So Rav Safra went ahead and acquired his donkey back, as the donkey had become ownerless when he presented it to the lion, right? When you give it up to be eaten by the lion, you're saying, okay, I relinquish my rights to this donkey. The lion can have it, and I do this on behalf of my share of keeping everyone in the caravan alive. We're all making the same sacrifice. But then somebody's donkey came back. Now that's a little bit lucky or a little bit miraculous. So you could ask, well, okay, but everyone has to, sacrifice their donkey. He's like, I sacrificed my donkey. My good fortune was that my donkey was not eaten. But I did my part. Because there others could say, well, you still got your donkey, so tomorrow night it's your turn again. And you say, hey, I sent mine out. Tomorrow night it's somebody else's turn. I got lucky. And that's the deal that anyone has when they send out their donkey. It was ownerless, and then it came back to me. Now, at that point, anybody could have acquired the donkey. Right? When he sent it out, if it was then not eaten, basically whoever found the donkey first would acquire the donkey. He happened to find it first, his own donkey, which would make sense. The donkey probably wandered back to him. So Rav Safra went ahead and acquired it back as the donkey had become ownerless when he presented it to the lion. And although Rav Safra did not lose his donkey, he had fulfilled his obligation to provide the lion with a donkey, and his good fortune did not affect his obligation vis-a-vis the other travelers. Now, with regard to this episode, Rav Acha of Difti said to Ravina, why was it necessary for him to acquire the donkey again? Although Rav Safra made it ownerless by sending it to the lion, it was made ownerless only with the intention that the lion would consume it. But it was not made ownerless with the intention that everyone else could acquire it. So accordingly, no one else could have acquired the donkey. And Ravina said to him, Rav Safra did so as an added precaution. He actually said, well, if it's not eaten, it's ownerless. As I sent out this donkey, it is now ownerless. Then if the lion didn't eat it, whoever acquired it gets it. Rav Safra acquired it, but the risk that he took was that anyone could have acquired it. But because he took that risk, that's why he has fulfilled his end of the bargain. And now afterward, he doesn't have to send his donkey out again on the subsequent night. Now Rav raised a dilemma before Rebbe. If one descended into the river in order to rescue another person's donkey instead of his own, but he did not manage to rescue it, then what is the law? Okay, so here comes the river flooding. The donkeys are going to be swept away. The old wealthy man has the 200 dinar donkey. The young, less wealthy man has the 100 dinar donkey. He can only rescue one. He says, I'll rescue yours if you compensate me for giving up mine. Yes, I will compensate you. So the young man goes and swims and tries to rescue the more expensive donkey, but he fails. He's not able to rescue it. Then what? Does he get compensated? Does he not get compensated? This is the dilemma. So if he did not manage to rescue it, then what is the law? Does the stipulation still apply so that the owner of the donkey that he attempted to rescue must compensate him for the loss of his own donkey? It couldn't be he didn't guarantee he was going to rescue it. He just said, if you will compensate me for giving up my donkey, I will try to rescue yours. That would sound like, I will try to rescue yours. The deal is he has to compensate. If he said, I will rescue yours, maybe not, unclear. Exactly what did he say? And Rebbe said to him, and is this a question? It is clear that he has the right to collect only his wage, but he is not entitled to the value of his own donkey because he didn't save the more expensive donkey. Rav raised an objection to Rebbe's ruling from a baraisa. In a case of one who hires a laborer to bring cabbage and plums to an ill person, and he went and found that the patient had already died or recovered, the employer nevertheless gives the worker his entire wage. So evidently one is paid for his efforts even if the desired result is not accomplished. Accordingly, the rescuer's stipulation should still apply, and one should be obligated to pay another for attempting to salvage the more expensive donkey at the expense of sacrificing his own donkey, even if he did not actually succeed in doing so. And Rebbe said to him, are those two cases comparable? There, in the case of the ill person, the agent performed his assignment, as he procured and delivered the foods to the ill person. But here, in the case of the donkeys, the agent did not perform his assignment, as he was unable to rescue the animal from the river. We are on page 116b now. Apropos the episode involving Rav Safra, the Gemara discusses the division of expenses among travelers in a caravan. This gets very interesting, I think, and quite relevant in modern times. The sages taught in a baraisa, in the case of a caravan that was traveling in the desert, and a troop of bandits stood over it in order to attack and pillage it, and the members of the caravan agreed to pay ransom to the bandits. So they calculate each traveler's contribution according to the amount of money he is carrying, and they do not calculate according to the number of souls in the caravan, i.e. the expense is not divided equally among the travelers, right? This could be like you're, traveling on a boat past, where the pirates are, right? The Somali pirates, right? Who are hijacking. I mean, usually they're hijacking oil ships, not so much, private boats carrying passengers. But the principle is the same. What does the bandit want? Now, we're not talking about a bandit who's going to kidnap and demand ransom. Here the bandits want what the caravanners, right, what the members of the caravan are carrying. Right? They want to steal the load that the people in the caravan have with them. So now it would make sense, it seems to me, that the people, the guy who's carrying $1 million worth of diamonds, and another member of the caravan is carrying, $1,000 worth of wheat. If the bandits make off with the stuff in the caravan, obviously the one with the diamonds is going to suffer a much bigger loss. So you can say that now that they're going to have to produce, let's say a $10,000 bribe, let the guy who's saving his $1 million worth of goods contribute more, to the extorted it is ransom, but not for kidnapping, a ransom to let them pass. It makes sense, right, that the one who's carrying more valuable goods should contribute more to the ransom. But if this caravan hired a scout who travels in front of them and leads them safely through the desert, then the travelers calculate each one's contribution to paying the scout's wages, even according to the number of souls, as opposed to just the number of people, right? There's a number of people in the caravan. It doesn't matter who's carrying what, right? It's just that per person charge to pay the scout who's going to lead them safely through. That's different than the bandit who would steal their goods, and the one who are carrying more expensive goods have to make a bigger contribution. Now, but then the Gemara adds, and they should not differ from the usual custom of donkey drivers who often have set procedures for such situations. So we have a general principle in the absence of a custom of the route, a custom of the caravans, a custom of the donkey drivers. If there is such a custom, well, then obviously the donkey driver, the scout, expects to get what is normal in that industry, in that locale, and the law is not going to differ from that. Now, the donkey drivers are permitted to stipulate that with regard to anyone whose donkey becomes lost, the caravan will provide him with a different donkey. If the donkey was lost through negligence, they do not provide him with another donkey. But if it was lost not through negligence, they provide him with another donkey. And if the individual whose donkey became lost said, "Give me money instead of the donkey, and I will guard the caravan along with everyone else," they do not listen to him. And the Gemara asks, well, isn't this obvious? And no, it is necessary to teach this for a case where he already has another donkey, lest you say that he will guard the caravan for its sake. Since he still owns one donkey, he never lost his incentive to guard the caravan, and the other drivers should therefore give him money if he wishes. And the Baraisa therefore teaches us that guarding one donkey is different from guarding two donkeys, and the driver will be more likely to guard the caravan properly if they supply him with another donkey. Now the Gemara cites another Baraisa that discusses the division of expenses among a group, right? Going on a group vacation, how are you going to divide the expenses? The sages taught, in a case of a boat that was traveling on the sea, when a gale arose and threatened to sink it, and the sailors lightened its load by throwing some of their belongings overboard, right? This is like the Jonah story before they realized that the storm is they're not gonna survive the storm unless they figure out what exactly is going on. Turns out that one of them is a prophet running away from his mission, and he admits that, and then they throw Jonah overboard and the storm subsides. Very unusual circumstance, right? But not so unusual, especially in the old days of sailing ships, that a storm would come and they needed to lighten the ship, right? And they're not going to throw people overboard, but they are going to throw cargo overboard. Now, if you're throwing cargo overboard, let's just start with the simplest example. Let's say you have barrels of whale oil and barrels of water. Hopefully you're going to throw the barrels of water overboard. Although, if they're going to get shipwrecked, they're going to need that water, right? But if you're comparing whale oil, let's say, to wine is nice. Wine can be kind of expensive. Whale oil, super expensive, right? But they weigh the same amount. So when the ship is, about to go down, really all they care about is the heavy things got to go, right? The heavy things got to go. So what's going to happen here? So in a case of a boat that was traveling on the sea when a gale arose and threatened to sink it, and the sailors lightened its load by throwing some of their belongings overboard. So then the sailors calculate the amount that each must throw out according to weight, but they do not calculate it according to how much money the items are worth, and they should not differ from the usual custom of sailors. So there's definitely the custom of the sea, which deals with pretty much every situation. But in the absence of a clear custom of the sea to deal with this situation, if they're just figuring out what to do, maybe these are amateur sailors who are figuring it out. Okay, well, what matters now is weight, and we're not going to worry about the fact that somebody has very expensive barrels of whale oil and somebody else has much less expensive barrels of wine. We're just going to throw over the barrels that are immediately here, right? And then later, if this guy wants to be compensated because we threw over his barrels, we're going to say to him, hey, if we didn't throw those barrels out, we were all going to die. What we were concerned about is weight, and you're going to get compensated as if they were the cheapest product, not the most expensive product. And if a number of boats are traveling together, like a caravan of small boats, a flotilla, the sailors are permitted to stipulate that with regard to anyone whose boat was lost, the others will provide him with a different boat. And if his boat was lost through negligence, well, then the other sailors do not provide him with another boat. But if it was lost not through negligence, then the sailors do provide him with another boat. And if the boat sailed to a place where the boats do not travel, the other sailors do not provide him with a different boat. And the Gemara asks, isn't this obvious? And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary because in the month of Nisan, the boats distance themselves from the shore by 1 rope length. And in the month of Tishrei, they distance themselves by 2 rope lengths, probably because storms can arise that are dangerous. And in this case, the boat was traveling during Nisan and sailed to the place where boats sail during Tishrei. So lest you say that the sailor is not considered negligent because he is taking his usual route and traveling as he is accustomed to, the Baraisa teaches us that his actions are considered negligent. Now the sages taught in a Baraisa in a case of a caravan that was traveling in the desert, and a troop of bandits stood over it and pillaged it, and one of the travelers arose and rescued the caravan from the bandits. So he has rescued the property for the common good, i.e., each member of the caravan gets back his property. But if he stated, I will rescue the property from the bandits for myself, well, then he has effectively rescued the items for himself, and he is now the legal owner of all the property. Right? It would be the menshi thing to do if he has the ability to rescue the property from the bandits, to do so on behalf of all the members of the caravan. But if he doesn't do anything, no one else is able to rescue it, so it's all lost. So if he's the one who's strong enough to fight off the bandits, you can see the argument for why he would acquire that property, and then he might demand payment or reward or even sell that property back to its owners. Now the Gemara asks, wait a minute, what are the circumstances of this case? If each member of the caravan is able to rescue his property, well then even in the latter clause where the rescuer states that he is saving the property for himself, the law should also be that the possessions are rescued for the common good, as the other members of the caravan did not despair of retrieving their property. And if each member of the caravan is unable to rescue his property, well then they despair of retrieving their property and they relinquish ownership of it. Consequently, even in the first clause, the law should also be that the one who rescues all the possessions has rescued them for himself, and he is the legal owner. So why is there a discrepancy between the law in the first clause and the law in the latter clause? And the Gemara answers, Rami Bar Chama said, here in the case of the Baraisa, we are dealing with a caravan whose members are partners and jointly own the confiscated property. And in a case such as this, a partner may divide the property without the other partner's consent. Therefore, if he said that he intends to save the property for himself, he has dissolved the partnership and divided the property so that if he is able to rescue only some of the property that he rescues is his share of the joint property. And if he did not say that he intends to save the property for himself, he has not divided the property, and whatever he rescues is jointly owned by the partners. That's a more specific and more understandable outcome, right? Where they jointly owned, and so whatever he rescues belongs to the partnership, but it might be that what he brought back actually is the part of the partnership that belongs to the other partner. Whereas if he says, whatever I rescue is my share of the partnership, then he gets that, right? It's not, he wasn't able to rescue all of it anyway, but what he rescues, he wants to benefit from it. Now, Rava stated a different answer. Here in the Baraisa, we are dealing with laborers who are hired to protect the caravan. And one of these guards saved the traveler's property. And it is in accordance with the opinion of Rav. As Rav says, a laborer may retract his commitment to his employer even in the middle of the day. He was hired to carry the property, not to fight off bandits. Once that became the issue, okay, his job ended because the bandits took all the property. Now, if he wasn't hired to fight bandits, he was just hired to haul the property, he could arise and say, yeah, okay, I quit. And then he goes after the property, and whatever he rescues, he rescued for himself. Now, if you're saying he was hired to protect the caravan, then it seems like, and then he did his job protecting the caravan by getting the property back, then that should belong to everyone. But what they're saying here is, yeah, but if he quits, right, a guy can quit at any time. If he's hired to do a job, he can quit. Once he quits, if he goes on, what could be a very dangerous mission to rescue it back from, it was one thing to just carry a spear and look tough so that the bandits wouldn't come and steal. It's different once the bandits have stolen to go chase after them and try to get it back. So this laborer hired guard might say, well, I quit being your guard. I'm going to go after the property. If I might get killed. I might get some property. If I get some property, it's going to be mine. And you can see why that would work. And the Gemara explains, as long as he did not retract his commitment, he is considered to be under the jurisdiction of the employer, so that anything he saves automatically belongs to the employer. But when he retracts his commitment, right, when he says, I quit, then it is for a different reason that he is able to do so. Not just that he can quit at any time, but rather, as it is written, for unto me the children of Israel are servants. That's Leviticus 25:55. And this indicates that Jews are servants of God, but not servants of servants, i.e. other Jews. Consequently, it is permitted for a laborer to conclude his term of employment whenever he wants. Once he does so, if he saves property that the members of the caravan are unable to rescue, so that property belongs to him. Rav Ashi stated a different answer. The Bryce is discussing a case where the other members of the caravan are able to rescue the property with difficulty. Therefore, if he revealed his intention to rescue the property for himself and the other travelers did not protest, it is clear that they have despaired of recovering their property, and the rescuer has secured the property for himself. But if he did not reveal his intention to rescue the property for himself, then the status quo remains and the property has been rescued for the common good because they never despaired of recovering it. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 10, the final chapter. I'm almost done today. So if you've got questions or comments, please get them in now. We're just going to read the next Mishnah, Mishnah number 6, and the beginning of the Gemara discussing this Mishnah number 6. In a case of one who robs a field from another person and thugs, this is the translation of masikin, and thugs subsequently take the field from the robber, the law is dependent upon the circumstances. If it is a regional disaster in which the thugs seize all the property in the region, the robber says to the owner of the field, that which is yours is before you, i.e. it is your prerogative to try to reclaim it from the thugs. And no compensation is required since the thugs would have seized the property anyway. But if the thugs took that field alone due to the robber, then the robber is obligated to provide the owner with a different field. Right? If the robber steals, in this case land, right, takes control of it by brazenly overpowering the previous owner, he still owes that land. When thugs come and take that land from the robber, okay, so the robber cannot make compensation from that field because now the thugs have it and it's beyond his power to retrieve it from them. But since the thugs took it from the robber still has an obligation to make good on what he stole to the original owner. But if the robber stole the land and then everyone in the region lost their land, in terms of the robber's own obligation, he got lucky, but really no one in that region is lucky since they all lost their land to this marauding army. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, one who teaches the Mishnah using the term masikin does not err, and one who teaches the Mishnah using the term matzikin also does not err, as both terms may be used to refer to thugs. One who teaches the Mishnah using the term matzikin does not err, as it is written, quote, in the siege and in the distress, matzok, with which your enemies shall distress you. That's Deuteronomy 28:55. So consequently, matzikin are individuals who cause distress to others. And the one who teaches the Mishnah using the term masikin does not err, does not make a mistake, as it is written, Deuteronomy 28:42, all your trees and the fruit of your land shall the locust consume. Right? This is from the curses of if the children of Israel now entering the promised land, if they will not keep the Torah, if they will not dedicate themselves to serving God, if they will wander off after the gods of others, etc., then these are the curses that will befall them. And so one is that, the people who cause them distress. And this one is all your trees and the fruit of your land shall the locust consume. And in the standard Aramaic translation, we translate this phrase as shall the locust sakeya consume, which is related to masikin. So consequently, masikin are those who consume the property of others, right? And so these are both words that you could sort of derive if you're knowledgeable of Torah, Hebrew, and Aramaic of the time that the sages were speaking, to understand why both the term masikin and matzikin would refer to thugs. Okay. Nina's telling me no questions here on Bava Kamma 1. Something went wrong here. Yeah, okay. On Bava Kamma 116. So have a great night, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday at the regular time, 6 p.m.